There aren't many ways that you can actually improve the after-tax returns of your investments, at least without taking on additional risk. So you probably want to pay attention when we do have those opportunities. And there's one that's usually there for the taking. But most people either don't know about it or just ignore it. And that's asset location. Asset location is pretty much what it sounds like. It's paying attention to where you put the different pieces of your investment portfolio, which account you put your different asset classes into, and it's basically free money just for being organized. Depending on the specifics of your portfolio, it can be a pretty decent chunk of money every single year. In fact, in Vanguard's Advisors Alpha study, they estimate that focusing on your asset location can be worth an increased return of up to 0.6% per year. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to turn up my nose at nearly 0.2% per year of extra return without any real downside. So, how does asset location actually work? Well, like I mentioned earlier, it comes down to placing your individual investments in your different investment accounts to take advantage of the specifics of how each type of account is taxed. Before we get into the specifics there, though, I want to touch on a big picture issue. A lot of people look at each of their investment accounts as separate things. Your 401k did this, your IRA did that, and then your brokerage account did this other thing. You shouldn't do that. Put simply, it's all one big portfolio that's just broken up into a bunch of different accounts. You own all of it. It's all your money. So you want to make sure that it's all working together. It's not a problem if your different accounts have different allocations. In fact, as we'll talk about in a minute, you will almost definitely want to have different allocations in your different accounts. Now, I keep talking about these different accounts. So let's be specific about what I mean there. You can have all sorts of different actual individual accounts, but there are really three main categories of accounts, broken up based on their tax treatments. There are taxable accounts, tax-deferred accounts, and then finally tax-exempt accounts. So let's walk through them quickly. First up are your taxable accounts. These are basically going to be your brokerage accounts. In these accounts, you're taxed on everything in the year that it happens. When you sell or get any distributions, those go on next year's tax returns. This means that there's an ongoing tax drag on the investments in these accounts. But it's also pretty easy to use this money. Plus, there's no limits on what you can save into this bucket. Then you have your tax-deferred accounts. These are things like your traditional 401k, 403b, or just regular IRA. You generally don't pay any taxes on the money that you put into the account, and you don't owe any taxes on whatever you do while the money stays in the account, but whatever you take out is taxed as ordinary income. And then the last category is tax-exempt accounts. These are things like your Roth 401k or Roth IRA, accounts where you don't get the tax deduction when you put the money into the account, but you also don't owe any taxes after the money goes into the account, either while the money stays in the account or when you actually go to take the money out. Our goal with asset location is to make the most of these differences. We want to slot our assets into the right sorts of accounts to maximize our after-tax benefits. Again, this is free money basically for being organized and, frankly, solving a not very difficult puzzle. So how do you decide what goes where? Well, we use this, the asset location matrix. As you can see, there's really only two things we need to know about an investment to figure out where we would ideally like to place it. We're looking at the investment's expected return, roughly what sort of returns you expect from the investment going forward, and its tax efficiency, roughly how much the taxes will reduce the investment's expected returns. And both of these are relative to the other investments in your portfolio. The easiest way to see how this works is to just start filling in the asset location matrix. So let's start in the top left, the low expected return and low tax efficiency corner. This is basically bonds. They're generally going to have pretty low levels of expected return, and they typically kick out a ton of income. So they have a pretty hefty tax bill. This means you really want to get them in your tax-deferred accounts, if at all possible. In fact, and come back to me for this one, if you don't learn anything else about asset location, it should be this. Whenever possible, you want to stick your bonds in your tax-deferred accounts. The logic behind this is that you can sort of think of the government as a silent partner in your tax-deferred accounts. They're going to get a decent chunk of the money in there when you go to take it out, and all else being equal, we want to give them as little of our money as we possibly can. So we want to shift our growth out of our tax-deferred accounts and into either our taxable or tax-exempt accounts whenever possible. Now, don't get me wrong here. We do still want that growth. But if possible, we would prefer that growth to be in one of our other types of accounts. Let's go down the table and look at the low expected return, but high tax efficiency box. A good example of this is municipal bonds. These are bonds, so they have low expected returns, but muni bonds are special in that they have a bunch of tax advantages depending on the specifics of the bond. And specifically with muni bonds, you really don't want to put them anywhere but your taxable account. If you want to dig into the reasons for this and also whether munis might make sense in your portfolio, we've got an article in the description below on them. But to summarize here and back up a little bit, anything that falls into this box, we would likely want to get into our taxable account. We'd prefer not to use the space in our tax-deferred account since these assets are reasonably tax efficient, and we'd also prefer not to put them in our tax-exempt account since they don't have very high expected returns. And we want to get as much growth as possible into our tax-exempt account. And speaking of our tax-exempt account, let's take a look at the high expected return and low tax efficiency bucket. These are going to be things like REITs and value stocks that have high returns and lots of distributions. These types of assets really want to be in your tax-exempt accounts. They've got some pretty ugly tax bills, so you don't want them in your taxable account, and you want to get all of the growth into your tax-exempt account that you possibly can so that you can keep all that growth for yourself. And then we can take a look at the last bucket here. High returns and high tax efficiency. So big returns and low tax bills. In practice, this is going to be most, if not all, of your stock portfolio. I usually do this section last when I'm putting an asset location together. So this section kind of fills in the gaps. But in an ideal world, it would go in either your taxable or tax-exempt accounts if you have the space. Basically, they've got high enough returns that you'd like to get them into your tax-exempt account if at all possible, because again, you really want that growth. But they also have low enough taxes that it's not that big of a drag if they're in the taxable account. It's really not the end of the world to pay those taxes if that's where they need to go. You should pay attention here though. If you have multiple assets that fit into this category, you'll want to pay attention to which ones you place into which accounts. Just like everything else though. And actually, if you want to get your own copy of the asset location matrix, just head to retirementresearcher.com/location to download it here. Asset location can be a really powerful tool for your portfolio and can provide a ton of value. As I mentioned, Vanguard's Advisor Alpha study says it can be worth up to 0.6% higher returns per year. And even better, it's pretty darn close to free money. All you need to do is pay attention to the asset location matrix and do a quick puzzle. But there's one thing that you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about your asset location. Your asset allocation, the things that you decide to put into your individual portfolio, are much more important than your asset location. It's much better to have something in the wrong account than it is to be in the wrong portfolio. If you decided that you want a portfolio that's 40% bonds, but your tax-deferred accounts only cover 30% of your portfolio, well, that means that you're going to have some bonds that aren't in your tax-deferred account. And that's okay. It's much more important to have the right amount of risk in your portfolio than it is to try and optimize your asset location. Your asset allocation is your big strategic decision. Your asset location is one of the different tactical decisions that you make about your investments. But that said, it's still a pretty important tactical decision. And frankly, there's no reason not to take advantage of your asset location in your portfolio. If you want to get your own copy of the asset location matrix so that you can make sure that your own asset location is solid, head over to retirementresearcher.com/location. It's here on the screen, and we've also got it down in the description below. And just remember, try to get your bonds in your tax-deferred account if at all possible. If this was helpful, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so that you can see what we're up to. If you have any questions on this or any other questions that you'd like me to address, just drop them in the comments below. You can also check us out on the web at retirementresearcher.com and make sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep up to date with everything that we're doing.